Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Will the United Kingdom remain within the European Union? This was the question being asked to the Prime Minister, David Cameron. He delivered a very important speech this week in which he proposed a referendum on whether the UK should stay in Europe or not by 2017. This is what he had to say. It is time for the British people to have their say. It is time to settle this European question in British politics. We have the privilege of having United Kingdom's ambassador to France, Sir Peter Ricketts. He is also the former national security advisor of David Cameron, and he'll be able to answer the question. Obviously, the question is Great Britain about to leave the European Union?
Well, David Cameron has said he wants to put that question to the British people. But let's be clear, David Cameron's intention is that Britain should stay in the European Union. He sees Britain as a strong part of the European Union. He wants to see a reformed European Union, and then he wants to get the consent of the British people for the UK to stay, and so close this debate that has been going on so long in British politics.
Many European leaders are not seeing it that way. In France, for instance, there was criticism. The Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius said, you know, we can't have Europe à la carte. He said it's like if the EU was a football team and the British came and said we have to play rugby.
Well, I don't want to join into polemics with French ministers, but let me explain how the British side see it. First of all, Europe is already quite diverse. We have some countries who are part of a single currency, others who are not, some who are in the Schengen borders free area, others who are not, some who cooperate together, for example, in conflicts on Libya or Mali, others who do not. And our proposition is that we need to have a Europe that embraces that diversity, that reforms, that responds to the challenges of competitiveness in the world, and where a country like the UK will be a member of the European Union, not a member of the Eurozone, but with our interests protected. So that's what we're seeking, a reformed European Union where Britain can remain a strong member.
Let me just cite another European leader, the head of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz. He said the reforms that the UK is calling for are actually being blocked by the UK. He's saying they are the ones who are largely responsible for the delays in Europe and also the ones pointing fingers at Europe. So basically the argument that David Cameron says we need to reform Europe, but the Europeans saying, well, he's preventing us from doing so.
Clearly, I don't accept that. We will come forward with proposals to make the European Union more competitive, more flexible, more open, less restraints on business, where necessary, with the possibility of powers flowing back from the centre to the nation states, so that Europe is in a good place to compete for business and growth and jobs in the years ahead.
I mean, is David Cameron really bent on improving Europe, or is he just playing British politics because there's a very strong anti-European Union feeling in your country?
No, he's been very clear that he wants to make these changes for the benefit of Europe as a whole, not just the UK. The UK would benefit, but it's not as if he's asking for changes just for Britain. He's looking for reforms for Europe as a whole, which will make Europe a better and more effective competitor in the world. We all need to recognise that Europe has to go out and earn its living. We need growth, we need jobs, we need exports, we need the European Union not to be stuck in bureaucracy with too much centralised control. We need to have more flexibility and more competitiveness. So I think other European leaders need to wait for the proposals from the UK. It's certainly David Cameron's intention to put forward proposals, and then as leader of the Conservative Party, he has said that he would then fight the British election in 2015 on a campaign pledge to hold a referendum in the first part of the next Parliament.
So he's not pandering to anti-Europeans in your country. He's really trying to have a constructive approach, because other European leaders saying, well, he's asking the impossible because he knows that's not going to happen, and he really wants Britain eventually to leave the European Union.
Well, I'm quite sure that's not the case, that my Prime Minister wants Britain to stay as a strong and successful member of the European Union. But he wants to take on the issue.
Why? I mean, what's so attractive now for Britain in the European Union if it's not functioning well? Why not be on your own?
Well, the single market has always been a very important thing for the UK. Half of our exports at least go to Europe. We have an enormous exchange of people with Europe. We have a lot of investment coming from Europe and British investment in Europe. We have a lot of interest in Europe. But yes, there is a strong feeling in British public opinion that things aren't right with Europe. And I think the Prime Minister's intention is to take that argument on and to be able to present an improved, reformed Europe to the British people, and then, as he says, as leader of the Conservative Party, to fight and win a campaign for a referendum that then deals with the issue and gets that out of the way.
Do you think Britain would lose if it leaves the European Union, that it would be a problem?
Yes, and what David Cameron said in his speech was that he thinks Britain is better off in Europe, and actually it's better for Europe to have Britain in, because Britain brings many advantages to Europe. So he will clearly be working for Britain to stay in the European Union, but in that reformed way that I've said.
Right. But now he's saying basically Europe as is right now is unacceptable, that the British people should not accept the Europe that exists for now several decades. I mean, it's a big change.
Well, if you look in the opinion polls in the UK, you find that Europe is very unpopular. That's also true in many other European countries as well. There is a gap between public opinion and the reality of the European institutions as they are. And my Prime Minister's feeling is that that cannot continue without being addressed. In any case, other European leaders are putting on the table ideas for reform of the treaties, to embrace the integration that needs to take place in the Eurozone. We've heard the German Chancellor, we've heard others, we've heard President Barroso in Brussels making proposals for treaty change. So it's not only the UK that is now talking about treaty change, many others as well. We will have our proposals to make as part of that debate.
Last question on this issue. Don't you fear that because of this announcement of an in or out referendum on the horizon, other European leaders and maybe in the opinion in several countries will say, well, we don't need the British anymore. They don't really want Europe. They should just leave.
I don't think so. And I think we can make the case that others have ideas for changing Europe, moving towards greater integration. We have ideas to make Europe more competitive, more flexible. We think that's a good idea for Europe as a whole, and we think that that would be an attractive idea to many people in public opinion. And we believe we have a legitimate voice in the debate, and we want to join debate and argument with other European countries on that.
So you're confident that when a referendum comes, if it comes, David Cameron first needs to win the next election, the British people will say yes to a renewed Europe?
Well, I'm going to, as a civil servant, recognise that David Cameron, as leader of the Conservative Party, has put that idea on the table, and it obviously will be for his party to then take the campaign forward. But I think I've explained why we believe that it's right now to move in that direction.
Mali. France has decided to go to war to Mali basically alone. There's very limited support for France, except in words. Why this isolation?
Well, we were one of the first countries to come out in support of France when President Hollande took the courageous decision to move quickly. We absolutely accepted that that was right. We saw the same risk for not just France and for the neighbouring countries, but for Europe as a whole, if Mali descended into chaos, if those Islamist groups were able to move south, threaten Bamako, and for the whole country to collapse into chaos and disorder. That would not be good for anyone. So we supported France politically from the word go, and we responded within 24 hours to a request from France for help with transport aircraft to get material, tanks, helicopters, equipment to Mali as soon as possible. And we're still helping, and our big transport aircraft will still continue to work with the French military as long as that's necessary.
What more will you do? Will you send troops to Mali?
Our Prime Minister has been very clear that we're not going to have combat troops in Mali. Remember, we already have 8,000 troops in Afghanistan continuing major operations there. We will continue with our transport help to France. The other thing we will do is put a lot of effort into training African forces. So we've said we're ready to train the Nigerian forces. We're ready to contribute to the European Union training mission. Because I think our French friends agree that the medium-term solution to this is not French or Western forces, it's African forces working with the Malian government to bring stability to Mali. And we will be making a major effort to help bring and train African forces to Mali.
Do you share the French assessment that this is really a direct threat to Europe, that having the kind of Sahelistan being created in that area would really pose a danger to Europe, or do you think the French are really concerned about France essentially?
No, we agree. We think it poses a direct threat to Europe. Anyone who doubted that, I think you have to look at the events in Algeria to see that the presence of Islamist terrorist groups in that part of Africa, Sahel, is a threat to all our interests. We had 6 hostages brutally murdered in that attack. It was an attack on Western interests, Western people, not just on France. So yes, we all face a threat that could come from that ungoverned space in the north of Mali, and we all have an interest in helping France deal with it.
Isn't the threat higher because of the French intervention there?
No, I think the threat was there, and I think it would have been higher if we'd accepted that northern Mali should remain ungoverned space, and indeed that the Islamists should then threaten stability in Bamako, which would then have had a spillover effect in other countries of the region. So it was the right thing to move in to deal with it, and we will go on supporting France to the extent that we can.
Okay. Ambassador Ricketts, thank you very much for answering our questions. Thank you very much for watching this edition of The Interview here on France 24.